Welcome everybody to the Administration and Operations Committee meeting for December 13th, 2022. Attendance has been taken. We have a full complement of council members, and I'd like to open the floor for nominations for the position of Chair of the Administration and Operations Committee meeting. Councillor Bell.
I'd like to nominate my friend Councillor Pearce here.
Councillor Pearce, do you accept?
I do, thank you.
Okay, is there any more nominations? Councillor Coleman.
I'll move nominations be closed.
And seconder to close? Mayor Bailey. And nominations for the position of Vice Chair? Councillor Miller.
I'll nominate Councillor House.
Councillor House, do you accept?
Yes.
Okay. And is there any more nominations? Mayor Bailey.
Motion to close.
And seconder to close nominations, Councillor Pearce. Councillor Pearce, you have the chair.
Okay, thank you, and welcome everybody. Without further ado, we're going to jump right into the agenda here. Attendance has been taken, noting everybody is here. We've done the election of the chair. Anybody have anything to add to the agenda? Councillor Chambers.
Mr. Chairman, under other business, I would like to add unintended consequences of urban intensification.
Anybody else with anything to add to the agenda? Seeing none, can I get approval of the agenda with the amendment? Councillor Coleman, Mayor Bailey, questions? All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Okay, moving on. Declaration of pecuniary interest. If you do have any at this time, or if one shall arise, please state that as we get to it. Delegations and presentations. We've got 3 of them this evening. I think we've got a couple of them that are on Zoom and one of them that are here. The first one, Bob Matisse and Carol Richards, redevelopment fee refund. I believe they're on Zoom. Bob, Carol, are you there?
Yes, we are.
Yep. Okay, thanks for joining us. Just a reminder to those delegations, you do have 10 minutes, and then there will be some, if there's any questions, we will get to those afterwards. So go ahead when you're ready. You have 10 minutes. Thank you.
Okay, we are reopening this discussion on this bylaw about redevelopment. And after discussing it with a few of the people that were involved, they basically made us aware that this is probably something that's going to be changed in the future due to the fact that it really doesn't support any positive things for the community, in the sense that we're tearing down old buildings, we're reclaiming the land. In the case of the lot that we ended up in, it went back to farmland, yet taxes were still being paid as if it were a building lot. So that derelict building had been removed, and then we eventually purchased the lot from the owner at that time, and then we went ahead and built. And I know that, was it Mr. Chamberlain, Councillor Chamberlain?
Robert Chambers.
Yeah, was certainly agreed with us and supportive, and so was Mayor Bailey, up until the day that we actually had the meeting with you guys. And it ended up being a tie vote, 6-6, which was kind of done all at the last minute, right? Yep. Initially it was 7-5. And then because it was a tie, they went and they judged against us. So my feeling is we've been looking around, we've been talking to people. I don't know of anyone else that knows about this very arbitrary 5-year period that it requires you to rebuild. This was something we certainly weren't aware of, nor was the person that built had the lot that we purchased. Because quite honestly, he probably would have left a derelict eyesore in place. And literally a mile from where we live right now, I have a picture actually forwarded to you. Building right on concession 6, number 66, right across from the lovely Lions Park in Burford, is one of those buildings. And there's kids around that park. There are animals that get lost and run across that road looking for shelter. Can end up in something like that. And I don't understand why we don't have a bylaw that tells people when you have a dangerous building, take it down. I don't understand why there's a penalty for people that don't build within a 5-year time frame. And I don't know about it. Bob didn't know about it. Everybody I've talked to doesn't know about it. So our feeling is maybe we need to let the community know about it. But in doing that, of course, people are going to leave these buildings up. So I think it's smart that some of the counselors and so forth were saying, you know what, we should look into this because it really doesn't make any sense whatsoever for our community. And so we're wondering, hey, has something kind of been looked at already? Has maybe decisions been made and this bylaw being in the process of being changed? Because we feel for the over $17,000 we had to pay on this, we didn't get anything for it. We had to drill a well. We had to put in a septic. We got no infrastructure. And it was a lot that actually looked really nice the way it was. There was hayfield growing on it. So I really don't understand why we got dinged with this very, very substantial fee.
Yeah, and the demolition of this house was torn down in April of 2013. There's a 5-year period. We missed the window by a year. So we bought this lot in 2019. If we would have obtained a building permit the day we bought the lot, we would have missed it by 1 year out of this 5-year window. What's the difference whether it's 5 years, 6 years, 7 years? There's no difference on development fees at all. And then we hit COVID, we hit the pandemic. We went into a lockdown, which we could not obtain a building permit for over a year. We would not be sitting here if we could obtain a building permit if it wasn't for the pandemic. And the government's given everybody else a break on time frames. I'm just thinking Brant County could be a little bit lenient on giving us a bit of a break on this development fee.
Especially with 5 years being so arbitrary. Why not 10? Why not 15? Why, you know what I mean? It's just so arbitrary. So we would like to see some show of good faith from you in knowing that we've gone ahead and we have made basically Brant County look a lot better and a lot more attractive to people coming into the community by building something nice on it.
I've been approached by the media. They want, because it was so close of a vote on 3 meetings, it was 7-6 actually, 7-6 in favor of me there, the second meeting, which one of the counselors was told that he can't change his mind in the middle of a meeting, which I have never seen that written rule, that a member cannot change his mind in a meeting. But no, the media have approached me. They want to write this story, but I really don't want to do it right now. If Brant County, all the taxpayers see the bylaw, we're just going to see all these old buildings just be left up, and it'll look like the back roads of Kentucky in 10 years, because it's going to save taxpayers money if they don't tear buildings down. So I just don't see the purpose of this bylaw.
I have nothing else to add.
It just seems like a lot of money
We
to
could
pay
tell
for.
by how the meeting went last time that a lot of you on the council felt that this was ridiculous. And I'm hoping that maybe with time we've realized that, yeah, this is something that needs to change to make Brant County a better place.
Okay, thank you for that. Any questions for the delegation? Seeing none, how would committee like to proceed here? Councillor Chambers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And being on the last council when this was brought up the first time, I might be a little bit more aware of the issues in some of the new councilors. Um, the, um, the lot in question is just west of Burford. There used to be an existing residence on the lot. The residence was torn down, and then 6 years later, the delegation came along and built a new house. Our development charges bylaw stipulates that development charges will be incurred if or unless the lot is rebuilt within 5 years. And these people built it within 6 years. And I've always felt that development charges are to pay for growth. Prior to the demolition, there was one residence. After the demolition, there was 0 residences. And then they built the house and it's back to 1. So there's essentially no growth. And in my mind, there should be no development charges since there's been no growth. Although the development charges bylaw does stipulate the 5-year window. So it's a matter of the applicants paying the development charges, and then we can't change the bylaw, but we can refund by means of a grant the development charges, since essentially there's no growth and the time frame was missed by just 1 year. So I'm prepared to move that a grant in lieu of the development charges costs be given to the applicants. And I think that's the request, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Seconder in that? Councillor Miller. Any questions on that motion? Councillor Bell, then Councillor Howes.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just clarification. I drive that way fairly regularly. I think it was built this year, so that makes it 9 years rather than 6, if I'm not mistaken.
It's been under construction for 2 years now.
It's taken us over 2 years to get it built due to all the delays for materials and workers.
Thank you for that response. Councillor Howes.
Through you, Mr. Chair, can we ask staff to comment on the point that was noted in the presentation about availability of building permits during the pandemic and whether that was a factor in the timing on this?
Yeah.
Thank you, through you, the chair. To Councillor, yes, I can confirm that we kept business going as usual during the pandemic. There was not a time that a building permit was not available. And I can also confirm that the dates, we do understand that the home was previously demolished sometime between April 2010 and April 2013. And a building permit was issued June 29th, 2021.
Thank you.
Any other questions to the motion? Seeing none, we do have a motion that has been seconded to refund by means of a grant for the development fees. Councillor Chambers.
That obviously is a recommendation to council.
Okay. No further questions. All those in favor of the recommendation? Opposed? I think that's defeated. Motion is defeated. Okay, so Bob and Carol, the motion was defeated for a refund via grants.
Okay, I'll talk to the media. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, moving on to the next delegation, Jessica Robbins. You could just, this is kind of ironic saying it to this, but if you could just state your name and address, please.
My name is Jessica Robbins, and I'm from 51 Norwich Road in Scotland. So I'd like to request an address change. This is kind of an unusual request, but we've been at our address for the last 6 years, and through that time, we've learned that our neighbors are 51 Church Street West. So we sit side by side, but we're separated by a field. So you can't see each other from our homes, but we're still close enough that often things get confused. So deliveries, visitors. The previous owner at 51 Norwich Road also had an emergency situation, and the ambulance went to the wrong 51. So there is some historical context for that. Again, so some of the issues that we've had in the last couple of years was, visitors going to the wrong address and then being turned around and sent to the right one. Often deliveries will be set outside doors and left at the wrong address, so we have to go looking for those. In the fall, 51 Church Street West had a farm auction, and when it was time to pick up all that equipment, often trucks were pulling in our driveway and getting stuck in our grass because they couldn't turn around. They weren't meant to be in there, they were meant to be next door. So I've got a bit of a map that shows a bit of the distance. So it's about 600 meters difference between the two addresses. So again, close enough, but far enough away that we can't see each other. And currently, there's no one living in 51 Church Street West, so which is why I was requesting a change for that address, because obviously changing your mail and all of those things can take a lot of time. And my husband and I have a small business as well, so there's lots of documents that would need to change if we changed our address. So if there's potential to change the neighboring address, either now or maybe if that property goes for sale in the future and new owners move in, maybe there's opportunity to change the address at that time.
Okay. Thank you for that. Any questions to the delegation? Mayor Bailey, then Councillor House.
Through you, Mr. Chair, are we able to do that? Are we able to just do an address change? Because it certainly makes sense.
On that, who can help us out? Pam, thank you.
Through the chair to Mayor Bailey. Yes, we do have a process to do an address change. We did have staff reach out to the delegation just yesterday once we saw it on the agenda. It is usually, though, the property owner that puts forward the address change. This case is a little bit different. So we would need the property owner's approval to move forward with that change.
I just think, through you, Mr. Chair, I just think it's a reasonable request. And so maybe we could start the process and see what happens. And if there's no kickback, it just seems like it should be the right thing for us to do. Do you need a motion to?
Just 1 second. Councillor House?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question was going to be along similar lines. I agree it makes absolute sense, although I see a technicality glitch in you're not asking to change your address. You're asking to change somebody else's address, and that, yeah, I can see where that process could get messy, but fundamentally, one of the addresses needs to change.
Right. I don't want to inconvenience anybody, and I don't want to have to change all of my mailing information if potentially the other property goes up for sale. So if there's opportunity to change it with a new owner, then there's no inconvenience in that way.
Any other questions to the delegation? Mayor Bailey, are you looking to make that a motion?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion to start the progress to see see whether it can happen, and maybe contact the neighbor or whoever owns that other property and see whether they're a willing participant. And if they are, then I don't understand why we couldn't do it and why we shouldn't do it.
Okay. Seconder, Councillor Miller?
Yeah, I'll second it. Yeah. No, I think we're referring it to staff for further.
Any other questions on that? Does make sense. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. So staff will look into that and they'll be in contact with you. Thank you. Okay, 5.3 is Christina Zardo, Food Cycle Science, Waste Reduction. I think you're on Zoom.
Yes, good evening, Mayor, members of council and staff. My name is Christina Zardo.
I'm here on behalf of Food Cycle Science's Municipal Solutions team to discuss an opportunity for food waste diversion in Brant County. And I'll tell you a little bit about Food Cycle Science. We are a Canadian company. We're based out of Ottawa, and we're 100% focused on providing food waste diversion solutions. We do this using our technology called the Food Cycler, which is an in-home food recycler. It's sold directly to consumers through partnerships with companies like Vitamix and Breville, to classrooms through partnerships with not-for-profit organizations, and to municipalities through our Municipal Solutions division. We help many communities keep food waste out of landfills. Currently, we have working partnerships with 44 Canadian municipalities across 7 provinces and territories, from Nelson in BC up to Hay River in the Northwest Territories, and many in Ontario who often face struggles with food waste management or where green bins are not a feasible or affordable option. Now, the problem with food waste, of course, is that it is avoidable. It accounts for a large portion of our household waste, often a majority. It's made up of mostly liquid, which is heavy and freezes in the winter. And on top of that, when we have food waste in landfills, it's responsible for generating harmful greenhouse gases. So all of these factors make it so that food waste is a problem that has a strong municipal impact. And one of those impacts to counties and municipalities is that since food waste makes up so much of our waste stream, it's causing our landfills to fill up quickly. Now, operating a landfill or paying for disposal is a costly endeavor to ultimately taxpayers, and we want to extend the lifespan for as long as possible. And providing waste services in addition to that is a major expense. Now, the environmental impact, as I mentioned before, is that when we have organic waste in landfills, it produces methane gas, and that's a greenhouse gas many times more harmful than CO2. To put that into perspective, taking just 1 ton of food waste out of the waste stream is equivalent to taking 1 car off the road for an entire year. And then in our communities, when we put food waste in the garbage, it can cause some odors, which is unpleasant for humans, of course, but interesting for critters and animals like bears, raccoons, skunks, other vermin that like to rummage through our trash. So when we remove food waste from the garbage, we eliminate these issues and we reduce volume. So this can save the county on hauling and disposal fees, landfill fees, and can save residents on hassle and excess waste fees where applicable. Now, we often get asked, haven't we solved this already? There are, of course, curbside green bins as an option, but this is common in big cities with high population density and an expensive investment in infrastructure. This can be cost prohibitive or perhaps operationally challenging to implement. Now, many people in your community might use something like a backyard composter, which we think is a great solution. Unfortunately, backyard composting is not feasible for everyone. It's certainly not a year-round endeavor, and there's still concern about wildlife. And then finally, the easiest solution is to continue to landfill our organics, but the long-term impacts here, they're costly and harmful to the environment. So what we've proposed is a different way of dealing with our food waste. It really focuses on making it easy to deal with and right in the home. So we've built a small kitchen appliance about the size of a bread maker, where you put in your food scraps, and this can include things like meat, fish, dairy, poultry, even some bones and pits. You push a button, and in a matter of hours, you have a nutrient-rich soil amendment that comes out. You've essentially recycled it into a sterile state and reduced the volume by about 90%. So on average, it will process about 1 kilogram of food waste per cycle. It takes between 4 and 8 hours to complete, and it uses less than a kilowatt hour of power, so a couple cents per cycle. The result is a handful of this dry, sterile, and odorless soil amendment that you can then add to your plants, to your garden, to your lawn, to enrich your soil. And you can use the machine anywhere with a plug. Most people will store it in their kitchen, basement, or maybe even a heated garage. From an environmental standpoint, the food cycler compares well to backyard and central composting without taking into account transportation emissions, but it does represent an approximate reduction of greenhouse gas impact by 95% versus sending it to the landfill. And from an economic impact, it offers a return on investment by significantly reducing your waste management costs. You're looking at a savings of upwards of $150 per ton versus traditional methods that involve hauling and disposal. Now, one thing that we've learned from working with municipal governments and communities is that their residents are very interested in being part of the solution. You know, they want to try new things, they want options, and they want their government to bring these things to the community. So with the Food Cycler, you get to bring something innovative and tangible to your residents. They don't need to live in a big city to be able to divert their organics. We believe that this should be available to all Canadians, no matter where you live. And then on top of the social pressures, the impact of the regulations that are coming to us here in Ontario, there are a number of diversion targets that I'm sure you know are coming into effect in the next couple of years. So with the Food Cycler, we're reducing food waste at the source. We're focusing on this low-hanging fruit, as I like to call it, because since it accounts for such a large portion of household waste, it is the single most impactful strategy to achieving these targets. Now, I mentioned earlier that we're working with several municipalities across Canada. To date, we have completed pilot programs in over 40 municipalities and over 4,700 households with really overwhelmingly positive results. We're able to achieve a significant amount of net new waste diversion. We've received a generous user experience rating of 4.6 out of 5 stars, and we've seen a 98% participation rate with the Food Cycler. Many municipalities have expanded their programs to more households after their initial pilot program. In Nelson, BC, as an example, after 2 successful pilot programs, they are putting a Food Cycler in every home in their city of 11,000 people. Now, a few months ago, Food Cycler was selected as a finalist for Impact Canada's Food Waste Reduction Challenge, which is a 3-part initiative from the Government of Canada to reduce our country's food waste. As a finalist, we were awarded a $400,000 prize and tasked with finding Canadian municipalities as implementation partners. So this funding is used directly to invest into municipal pilot projects at a heavily subsidized price. And these pilot projects will help us move into the final stage of the challenge, which comes with a $1.5 million grand prize. All future funding will continue to be used to invest into programs for Canadians, and any county or municipality that partners with us will have right of first refusal on subsequent funding. So our pilot programs are typically a 12-week project. Residents would purchase a Food Cycler from their municipality or county, use the unit, and track the number of times that they run a cycle. At the end, they of course get to keep their Food Cycler, and we conduct a brief survey so that we can evaluate the program. They're presented back to you into a final report or feasibility study, if you will, and then this data can be used to support your future waste management decision-making or a company recommendation or grant application to expand the program. And we offer this report and grant writing support as part of the cost of the pilot. So the funded pilot programs are available, and here we have pilot size recommendations. For a community of your size, we would recommend 250 households. They work on a subsidy model where Food Cycle Science provides a discount. We add in the federal investment from Impact Canada, and then we ask the municipality or county to subsidize the cost by $100 per unit, making the ultimate cost to residents $150 for a $500 machine. And of course, they get to keep it at the end. These are just recommendations based on our experience, but we can, of course, explore other options or sizes tailored to your needs or budget. And the funding period for this closes in April of 2023 or until funding is fully allocated, whichever comes sooner. So we would welcome the County of Brant as a partner in this Food Waste Reduction Challenge. We believe your community would be a great fit for the benefits. And today we'd ask you receive our presentation, and if there's any interest in partnering, that you refer this to staff for a report and recommendation. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Any questions? Councillor House.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to the presenter, and if we could go back to the slide that showed the dollars, if that's possible.
Yes, no problem. Give me just a moment here.
while you're doing that. The topic of green bins or alternatives to green bins comes up a lot within this municipality. I think anybody that was out campaigning in recent months probably heard some questions about that. And excuse me, my understanding is, first of all, we're in the middle of a multi-year contract on waste collection, and the sheer size of our municipality makes it difficult for a green bin program to end up being environmentally beneficial. So I think this is of interest. I'm curious a little bit more to ask a little bit more about the dollars. So the machine that sits on my counter is worth $500 as a place to start. Correct?
That's correct.
And you've got a model here for a possible way of doing it. My question is, with your many other municipalities who have either tested the program or embraced the program fully, would I be correct in assuming there's a varying level of municipal participation financially? That like do some municipalities subsidize the whole thing? Some municipalities don't subsidize at all. Like, is there have you witnessed varying approaches to this?
Yeah, you're exactly correct in that. So typically for a pilot program, the model is as presented to you. This way, kind of everybody is invested and has some skin in the game so that we can get good data and trial this in your community to make sure it works. However, in the city of Nelson that I mentioned before, where they're providing a food cycler to every home, that's fully subsidized by the government. So there's no outright cost to residents. So anywhere in between would work.
Thank you.
Councilor Kyle?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to the presenter. I'm just wondering, so the unit that sits on the countertop, the food cycler, what is the lifespan of that machine? So if we were to put one in a house for the $500, like how long does that last? What's the maintenance like on it? Just looking at logistics.
The lifespan of the machine is 6 to 7 years. And for an ongoing maintenance cost, of course, we would have to consider that it does use electricity. It is very little, but that is a factor. And there are carbon filters in there that need to be replaced a few times a year just to keep odors out. So that's an additional maintenance consideration.
You're good with that, Councilor Kyle? Okay. Councilor Grano.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I noticed on the timeline slide there that participants are asked after the 12-week mark about their usage. Do you have any data longer out? I know certainly in our own experience, when you get a new kitchen gadget, it's interesting. But do we have data that shows the longer term adoption and follow through in the program?
We do have some data on that. And what's interesting is we found that over time, people use the food cycler less. And we were concerned about that at the beginning, thinking that it was perhaps that, the novelty wore off or it wasn't working for them anymore. But when we investigated further, what we found is that increased awareness of the waste that they were generating in the first place helped them to waste less food. Therefore, they needed to use the food cycler less, only because they were generating less. So it wasn't that they stopped using it because they didn't like it. It was an additional kind of unquantifiable amount of waste that we were doing. That we saved.
Councilor Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I think you guys had a booth at AMO there, I believe, and it was pretty.
We did.
It's pretty popular. So, okay, yeah. So the one question was answered. There are consumables, and those are the carbon filters. Okay. Second question, and I don't know if you can answer this because it probably varies by municipality, but if I were selling this, I would try and show how much we saved as a municipality. So if there's 1 kilogram of food waste not being picked up by a truck, not being taken to a landfill, and we're in the middle of expanding ours, and we know that the cost is ridiculous. So do you guys have a ballpark figure for how much is saved for every kilogram not going to the landfill?
That's a great and loaded question because costs for waste vary from city to city. Even with your neighbors, you likely pay a different disposal fee at the landfill. So we'd like to understand what a fully burdened cost per ton may be and make an estimate based on that. If I had to throw out a number that I could guess, I would say your fully burdened cost per ton is probably somewhere between $150 and $200 a ton. And a food cycler is estimated to save at least 2 tons over its lifespan, which would mean that the return on investment would be about $300 to $400 per household, based on those rough numbers. I hope that helps.
No, it does, and like I say, if it were me, I'd be putting those numbers somewhere in your presentation. But thank you for helping me at least understand somewhere the
Thank you.
ballpark wise. So,
Any other questions? Councilor McAlpine?
I'm just wondering what the cost is of the carbon filters.
The carbon filters are available in bulk, so they're refillable. All you need to do is purchase bulk carbon. And if you buy through us, they're approximately $30 to $40 per year, depending on how often you use your machine and have to replace them.
That's per unit, $30 to $40 per unit?
Correct. And in the city of Nelson, while they'll have a lot of food cyclers in the community, what we're doing is establishing a bulk refill station. So the cost actually ends up being about 4 cents a kilogram or something quite low. And residents can come and just refill their filters at this station at a central location in the community.
Sorry, Christina, can you just clarify something? Did you say $30 to $40 per unit or $30 to $40 per year?
Oh, sorry, per year.
Okay, thank you. Per year, per unit.
Correct.
Any other questions? How would committee like to proceed with this? Councilor Miller.
thank you, Mr. Chair. I will put it on the floor that it does go to staff to put some numbers on it and bring it back for possibly doing a pilot project for 50 units.
Mayor Bailey will second that. Okay. Any questions on that recommendation to staff to look into this? Councilor Miller.
Just it's not a huge investment, and I think at the end of the day, when you look at all the costs of getting rid of waste, I think it probably is pretty fiscally responsible. Just want to remind everybody we did pass the climate emergency motion there last term of council, and I think not having trucks need to go up and down our roads collecting food waste. I think that would help, but so just throwing that out there.
Appreciate that. Any other comments to the motion or recommendation? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Okay, thank you for that. That brings an end to our delegations. Thank you very much for coming out. We will move on now.
Thank you.
Thank you. We will move on now to section 6, adoption of the previous minutes. Can I get a mover, please? Councillor Howes. Councillor Oakley. Any questions on the old minutes from September 20th? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Business arising from those minutes. Anything? Seeing none, move on to section 8, which are consent items. There's a couple here to be approved. 8.1, RPT-0289-22, the 5 Beverly Street East in St. George, Phase 2. Can I get a mover to get it on the floor? Mayor Bailey, Councillor Coleman. Any questions? Councillor Kyle.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Through you, just a quick question. When I was reading through this one, everything looks really good, but I'm just wondering about the parking with this facility. Like, it does have a very tiny parking lot now, so just wondering if there's a plan for parking if they were to put that deck on the back that it looks like is in the design.
Okay, I think Zach just come in. Are you able to speak to that?
Yes, through you, Mr. Chairman. As with any of these applications, they are reviewed by staff ahead of time before we make a recommendation to council. So we did look at the parking, and basically it does receive a, it's because of, it's basically grandfathered in with where it is. It wasn't kind of identified as a concern. So just given that it is within the downtown St. George area, we're adding parking in this area. So it wasn't identified as a concern by staff.
Okay, are you good with that? Okay, Councillor House.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Zach. I've been involved in a few CIP grant discussions in the past, and $45,000 stands out as a large compared to others we've seen in the past. However, for the benefit of people who might be watching this or hearing about it, it is small in comparison to the overall size of the proposed work on this building, which is over $500,000. I wondered if, for the benefit of people who may be watching, Zach, can you speak a little bit anecdotally about the overall big picture in which our financial contribution would be a small portion?
Yes, through you, Mr. Chairman, to Councillor Howes. So this is the first application to benefit from increased funding thresholds. We took an amendment to council in July of this year, just acknowledging, rising costs to do this type of work, and just making sure that the grant streams were competitive with our neighboring municipalities. And this grant application in particular kind of checks all the boxes where it's benefiting from a facade improvement grant stream, the planning application fee stream, the adaptive commercial use stream, and the internal renovations as well. So it's it kind of checks all our boxes, and the downtown grant was the other portion. So it's pretty unique, as it is actually eligible for all those grants under one application. And in terms of a program, administering the program, these are the type of applications that kind of show that, you're leveraging quite a few private dollars here, where, the grant is sizable at $45,000 compared to what we've been approving. But in terms of the construction costs associated with the project, we're over $500,000. So it means, that leveraging factor is just better on this application opposed to some of the other ones we've entertained.
Thank you, Zach and Mr. Chair. It's terrific to see local businesses investing this much in their properties in our downtowns.
Absolutely. Mayor Bailey.
Through you, Mr. Chair, just to clarify for anyone at council or around the horseshoe here that doesn't understand this building, although it seems in the drawings that it's the back end of the building, which it is, it's a clear sight line from the cenotaph coming down Highway 5, coming down Main Street. So it might be at the back of a funny little building, but without the renovations done properly, it would be an eyesore in so many ways, so often at the cenotaph. And as I said, everywhere you go in St. George to get to that light, our only light, it would look bad if it were done wrong. So I think it's very important. I hope council supports it.
Any other questions? Comments? Okay, we do have a mover and a seconder. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. That will go through to council on the end of the 2 weeks, I guess, on the 20th. Okay, carried. Moving on to 8.12, which is RPT-0344-22, Solid Waste Facility Operations Contract. Matt, are you going to speak to this? I missed it. Rob's here if we need some questions answered. Can I get a mover to get it on the floor? Councillor Coleman, Councillor Bell. Did you want to speak? Oh. Just here to answer questions? Okay. Any questions regarding this? Councillor Bell.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Rob, I think it sounds like a really good idea to keep with the current company. They seem to be doing a great job. The prices will go up that we pay them. Is that going to be carried through to the user fees?
Through the chair to Councillor Bell. That we'll decide that through the fees and charges as we go forward in our budget deliberations. So that wouldn't happen until 2023 consideration. So there's no proposal for it this year.
Yeah, just to follow up, if I may, Mr. Chair. I saw I tried to look through the fee structure that's later on in the agenda. I couldn't see any significant changes, but we are talking about quite
Maybe Heather Mifflin can help out with this from her report.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that, Rob.
Said, well, Heather Mifflin's here and her report's on it, so maybe she can help us out with that.
Yeah.
I don't think for this year there's any proposed changes in this, but it could be considered in the future if the costs do go up and we have to accommodate that.
If I read correctly, it was quite a significant increase in the first year. I think it was 15% we were talking about.
This contract, yes.
Yep. So that,
because of what else we're seeing in all of the pricing for everything, cost of living.
Yeah. Mr. Chair, I would say I could tolerate that, given that ultimately, if we don't recover it through user fees, it will go back into the property taxes, and this is a service we provide to the whole community, so I can live with that. Thank you
for that. Any other questions? Seeing none, we have a mover and a seconder. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Okay, moving on to 8.13, RPT-0346-22, County of Brant 2023 Proclamation and Events. Get a mover to get it on the floor. Councillor Oakley, Councillor Chambers. Councillor Chambers wishes to speak to it.
Yeah, if I could, Mr. Chairman, and this will be in the form of an amendment, I'd like to add an item to the list, and the item reflects that farming is known as the most dangerous occupation in Ontario. This year alone, 11 farm accidents happened that claimed a life, and last year 10 people were killed in farm accidents, including 2 children. March 13th to the 19th every year, which is the third week of March every year, is a Canadian Agricultural Safety Week, and I would like to add that to the list to promote farm safety.
Okay, seconder for that, Councillor Kyle. Any other questions to the amendment? Councillor Kyle? Okay, any other questions to the amendment? Okay, Councillor Kyle, go ahead with the other.
Yeah, so just a quick question, and I promise this is not me being offended, but I did notice that we do have Father's Day, something for Father's Day on here, but not Mother's Day. So I just wondered if that's actually the case, if it's an oversight, or if there really isn't anything for Mother's Day.
That's a very good catch. We will go to staff for that. Cindy, can you help us out?
Thank you. Through the chair to Councillor Kyle. It's my understanding that we included Father's Day because the County of Brant does offer a special event at the pool. There's a Father's Day swim specifically for that day.
Councillor Kyle?
If that's the answer, that's okay. But I wondered if that was something that was missed, and maybe that's something we can look at in the future.
That's a good catch. Any other questions? Mayor Bailey.
Through you, Mr. Chair, being the person who puts the flag up in most of these cases, I mean, this is a very extensive list, and it's very liquid. For instance, the coronation will happen this year, May the 6th, so I'm sure there'll be some sort of a proclamation for that. So I think that whether it needs to be an amended a recommendation, but it is a very liquid list. This is going to change. Right there, we had a Mother's Day slip up. There's going to be a king crowned, and there's going to be other things that are going to come and change this list. So I think as long as we somehow put in the language around this, that it's not in stone, that it is fluid. Yeah.
So the list itself is not exhaustive, okay. Any other comments, questions? Okay, so knowing full well to Mayor Bailey's point there that this list may in fact and will change as things come along. We do have one addition as of today, March 13th to 19th, Councillor Chambers, Canadian Ag Week. Is that what you're looking for?
Canadian Agricultural Safety Week.
Safety Week, my apologies. Okay. Everybody's good on that? Any questions, Mayor Bailey?
The coronation will be May the 6th.
So you're looking to add that as well then?
I would think so.
May the 6th, coronation. Okay, so with the addition of Canadian Agricultural Safety Week and the coronation, May 6th. Any other questions? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. It is quite the list, isn't it? Okay, thank you for that. Moving on to 8.14, RPT-0522-22, intern tax bylaw. Can I get somebody to put on the floor, please? Councillor Bell, Councillor McAlpine. Any questions on this? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed? That is carried. 8.15, RPT-0712-22 is the 2022 tax write-off report. Need a mover, please. Mayor Bailey, Councillor Miller. Any questions on this report? Councillor Miller?
Just how does this compare to the previous year?
Who can answer that for me? Is she on Zoom? Christine, you're there? Oh, there you are.
Yes, I'm here. Sorry.
Did you hear the question?
Yes, I did.
Okay.
For you to the counselor, this actually is a lower number than in previous years. The reductions are down. We have not had a reassessment, which actually would increase the numbers. The reassessment's on hold. We're expecting it in 2024, which will increase the numbers at that point in time. The ARB have not heard more than 10 cases in the entire year. So that has also put the numbers lower than normal.
Okay, through to Mr. Chair. Thank you, Christine, for the information. I mean, on the surface, it seems like a good number, but unless it's put into context, I'm never quite sure. So thank you.
Any other questions? Seeing none, we have a mover and a seconder. All in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Okay, now that brings us to 8.2, which are consent items to be received. If there's somebody on committee that's willing to do so, can I get a mover for them all? Councillor Coleman. Councillor Oakley. Councillor Miller, question.
8.22, 8.23, Mr. Chair.
Anybody else want any pulled? Okay, that being said, we're going to do the vote on 8.21, 8.24, 5, 6, and 7. All those in favor? Opposed? They are carried. 8.22, Councillor Miller.
Two questions, Mr. Chair, for you to whoever can answer. Talks about element 8, risk assessment. So two questions on that. One is power failure. We have diesel generators as backup. How long would a diesel generator last without refueling? And I imagine they might be different for the different systems we have, but if we say look at airport, how long could we expect that to last?
Through the chair to Councillor Miller, each of these scenarios is entirely different. And the good thing about the airport water systems, we've got all that water up in the air too, which we don't actually need any power for, just enough power to run the controls. So all of them are different. I would estimate that the minimum runtime we would have in any of them would be at least 12 hours. And many of them would be like 2 days. So in that range of time that we would have. And we certainly have a good fuel contingency to operate all of them for long-term power outages.
Okay, thank you. And that's not just a hypothetical question. We get a lot of power outages, so. Okay.
Could I add to that just a little? After Walkerton happened and everybody had to do the review of their systems back in the early 2000s, everybody, and then the blackout was in 2003. That was the real telltale to everybody as to how problematic some of the systems were set up. You know, where I worked at that time, we had systems where we shared generators back and forth to, you know, run a well for a while, get some water in the tank, and da-da-da-da-da. After that, everybody beefed up their systems, and I think now we're pretty much stocked for the generators.
Okay, thank you. Second question. I looked at the list of risks under element 8. One thing I didn't see, and maybe it's not a risk, so maybe that's a good thing. But my question is, how many consumable supplies for our water systems have long supply chains? And you know, I talked to the purchasing group at Stubbe's, and they're so busy trying to, you know, source things in North America and whatnot. So I'm just wondering if, because we had all those supply chain issues, I don't think they're ever going to go away. Is there a risk that, you know, we only have 3 days worth of whatever and supply chain shut down? Is that a risk? That's what I'm asking, I guess.
Mr. Walton? Through the chair to Councillor Miller, there's the odd silver lining that comes out of the clouds every now and then. And actually through the pandemic and what we've been through, this has been really looked at very thoroughly as to what the risks are to the system. So I don't know, I couldn't coach on any particular one as to what they were, but there's a lot of things we found out about the supply chains during the pandemic to which we've now got different strategies towards. And the really good thing in the water system business is that you also have neighbors who you share the same equipment with and whatever, and there's always, it's somewhat like farming. Sometimes when you get in a bad spot, it's your neighbors that help you out. We haven't been in any bad spots.
Councilor Miller?
Okay, we'll leave it at that. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Okay, so for 8.22 and 8.23, all in favor? Opposed? They are carried.
Mr. Chair, I had a question on 8.2.3.
Oh, I'm sorry. My apologies, Councilor. I thought that's what that one was for. Sorry. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. I just reading the report itself. It mentions a couple times expecting an adverse sodium result when the South Paris elevated tank is brought online. Now, driving by the South Paris elevated tank, the question is that going to be fed from the Bethel wells? And the second question is, why is staff expecting an adverse sodium result when that's brought online? Because it didn't explain that in the report.
Mr. Walton?
Through the chair to Councillor Miller, the South Paris tank will be fed both by the Bethel and the rest of the system. So there's ways to put water into that system from the rest of the wells, and Bethel clearly will directly go into there when it's running. So it'll be the mix in sodium between those different wells, and just the way that happens is why they're anticipating this. And it's because Bethel has a little bit higher sodium, and there won't be as much mix when we have that tank and more of that water going in from Bethel. Certainly don't expect it to be really that high, but at 20 milligrams per liter, it's a pretty low threshold that you have there to deal with.
Okay, yeah, no, that's what I was wondering, because obviously we know about the sodium at the Bethel wells, and you're still trying to figure out where that's coming from. So, okay, like I say, didn't explain in the report, but that sounds good. Thank you, Rob.
Okay, thank you for that. Okay, so we're going to move on to section 9, staff reports, RPT-0539-22, which is the 2023 fleet schedule replacement. I don't think Mr. Demers is here this evening. Can I get a mover to get it on the floor first? Councillor Bell, Councillor Oakley. Any questions on that report? Councillor Bell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Rob. We've had the conversation before when we've been talking about fleet renewals and the use of electric vehicles. I happened to be in the City Hall in Brantford the other day, and the whole fleet is going that way. And I know it's a different situation, but do we have some opportunities here to move some of our fleet into the EV category?
Through the chair to Councillor Bell, we have 2 electrical vehicles on order right now, but as you know, with the long order period, as sort of intimated in this report, we haven't received either of them yet either. So, and I believe in this year's plan, there's a plan for at least a couple more, I believe, for bylaw. So the trend has started, and we'll continue to report on the success of that.
Very good. Any other questions? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed? That is carried. 9.2, which is RPT-052622, the appointment of an engineer for the Harley Municipal Drain under Section 76 of the Drainage Act. Can I get a mover, please? Councillor Coleman, Councillor Miller. Questions? No questions? All in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Uh, 9.3, RPT-052422, the intention to designate under Part 4, Section 29 of the Ontario Heritage Act for Paris Plains Cemetery. Can I get a mover? Mayor Bailey, Councillor McAlpine, my apologies. Questions on that? Councillor Howes.
More of a question than or more of a comment than a question, if that's okay, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
Just a little bit of context, and Kayla's done a great job on the report. The owners of or the representatives of this property approached the Heritage Committee a few months ago, or years ago now, I guess maybe. But there have been a lot of changes to land use around this property, and it's I think it's appropriate and significant to take this step and support them in this step. So.
Any other questions? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed? That is carried. 9.4, RPT-0354-22, housekeeping amendments of the Good Forestry Practice Bylaw. Can I get a mover? Councillor Garneau, seconder. Councillor Kyle, questions on this? No questions? All in favor? Opposed? That is carried. 9.5, which is RPT-070822, the nuisance odor and lighting bylaw. Can I get a mover? Councillor Howes, seconder. Councillor Miller. Questions on this report? Councillor Oakley.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to staff. There's an option presented to delegate authority to a committee. Is there a particular committee in mind to handle this, or would a new committee need to be formed for this purpose?
Mr. Bergeron is going to come up here and answer that for us.
In discussion with the clerk, we would appoint a committee as needed. So if we do get a request for an appeal, we would move at that time.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Section 9.6, RPT-0527-22, the 2023 fees and charges. Can I get a mover, please? Councillor Bell, Councillor Chambers. Any questions on that report? Councillor Bell.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I think there'll be questions through to Heather. Heather is coming across. So while she's walking across there, I'd just be interested to hear from Heather the rationale we apply as we go through this. We do it every year, and there are some moving parts like inflation, new services, and what strikes me is that we, I think, need to be confident that we are charging individual users where individual users should be charged, and we're charging them the right rate, because otherwise, if we don't, it'll cycle back and everybody in the county through property tax will pay. And I'm particularly looking at the issues related to development charges, where you've indicated in the report that the consumer price index in that area is 15.6%. It's a huge increase, and yet we don't appear to be carrying those increases through in our charges. So if you could just expand on that, I would appreciate it.
Yep.
So for development charges, it's set in the bylaw that they are indexed by the non-residential construction price index, which at the second quarter, which this year was 17%. So we did index them back at September 1st by 17%.
One more question, if I may. We have this thing called Bill 23 floating around. And do our fees include, and I'm thinking particularly of the planning area now, do we include any additional costs there for the service we provide, given that we may end up having to pay some of it back? So almost as an insurance against our ability to meet all of our requirements, have we pushed the prices up of the services we provide?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I will maybe turn that over to Pam. She has, through Bill 109, I think, made some adjustments to the planning fees.
Pam?
Oh, thank you, Heather. To the councillor, yes, if you look on page 31 of the attachment, the top there, you'll note on the right-hand side, there are some specific fees that we've included as per Bill 109. We've not included anything, and I don't know that we will need to include anything in Bill 23, but if we do, we will come back to council and ask. But there are a few new fees and some of the fees that have been increased.
Any other questions? Councillor Oakley.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to staff. I did have a notice going through our fees here for Fire Administration Department that we have 3 different categories for false alarm response, malicious, notification failure, and accidental. All 3 of those do have, it's the same pricing structure for all of them. So I was just curious as to the reason we have 3 different categories for was essentially the same fee.
Through you, Mr. Chair, this was under fire or police?
Fire.
Cindy, could you help me out in that one?
Through the chair, I don't know historically why. I think that, likely it probably is just something that was set up historically, but I could dig into it a bit deeper just to see if there's rationale for continuing with the 3 categories.
All right, thank you very much.
Any other questions? Councillor Kyle.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple of quick questions. Going through the numbers, for the most part, all the way through the document, the amounts either increased, the fees increased, or kind of stayed the same. So then when one went down, it was fairly noticeable. So I'm just wondering, for something like summer camps under advertising, it went from 500 to 200. What would be the rationale for dropping it that much, just out of curiosity?
Cindy, do you know on that one? Or?
We'll have to look into that then.
Yeah, we'll look into it. Through you, Mr. Chair, we'll look into it and get back to you.
Okay, and then one other question. I also noticed, so there throughout the fees listed here, there's all of the different rental fees and charges for things like arenas and parks. But one thing I noticed is that Lions Park isn't mentioned anywhere in terms of ball diamonds and that type of thing. So I'm just wondering where they would fall in this, in the fee structure. Because I know that the county charges for them.
Cindy?
Through the chair, we'll have to look into that. This should be listed. It may have got missed, or it should be captured in another category.
Yeah, we'll follow up. Yeah.
So we can have that back for council then? On the 20th, we could have those answers?
For sure.
Any other questions? Good questions. Seeing none. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Okay, 9.7, RPT 0225 22, review of fence bylaw. Can I get a mover, please? Councillor Oakley, Councillor McAlpine. Any questions on this report? Councillor Bell.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Jessica, and she knows this question's coming. It's interesting that we raised the height of fence allowable from 1.8 meters to 2.2 meters. I asked a question to Jennifer, why 2.2 meters and how does it compare with neighboring communities?
Jessica? Yeah.
Through Chair Pierce to Councillor Bell. So thank you and great question. When we undertook the review of fence bylaw 5403 for the county, it was expressed to us over the years in dealing with both contractors that work within the county and residents as well that there was definitely an expression that we should try where we could to align with other neighboring municipalities like the city of Brantford, just to try and avoid confusion and frustration where we can for regulations for fences and pools. So that's readily what we did. We tried to align with neighboring and surrounding municipalities like the city of Brantford. So that is why there is an increase from 1.8 meters to 2.2.
Councillor Bell, you're good with that? Okay. Councillor Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through to Jessica. Jessica, I'll just say, well, I'm glad to see it gone up a little bit just for privacy and for sound. I read one of the letters from one of the members, and I thought, well, I should be able to answer that from reading it, but I couldn't. So the question was in one of the resident letters was, is the backyard fence that somebody has suitable? Is that okay for, if it's the right height for a backyard pool? Now I know in the bylaw it says buildings, like, you know, a house can also serve as one of the perimeters of the pool. But if you have a pool in your backyard and your backyard is fenced, do you have to separate? Do you also have to fence off the pool? I couldn't tell from reading that.
Through Chair Pierce to Councillor Miller. So as long as the fence does meet the enclosure requirements, once the new swimming pool enclosure bylaw is enacted, that is correct. Then they would be considered compliant with that bylaw and they wouldn't have to necessarily take any further enclosure actions as long as they comply with all regulatory elements of that bylaw.
Okay, thank you. And then the second question is, above ground pools have to always be fenced now, is that correct? And they didn't before? As long as they're... Anyways, I'll let you answer that one.
Through Chair Pierce to Councillor Miller. So that is technically correct. So we do allow for some exemptions for above ground swimming pools, as long as the pool walls or fencing that sits on top of the pool walls is compliant with the minimum height requirements under the proposed swimming pool enclosure bylaw. So if that pool could comply, then technically no, they wouldn't have to undertake any further enclosure requirements. However, if they do not conform and comply with that, then yes, they would need to erect some other sort of closure to safely enclose that pool.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Councillor Kyle.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Through you to our presenter. I'm just wondering, so the kind of along Councillor Miller's above ground pool. So just to give you an example, we have, so based on the way that the bylaw reads currently, any pool that holds a minimum of 600 millimeters of water, so that's 2 feet, requires some sort of enclosure or a cover, like a lockable cover. So if I go to Canadian Tire and I buy a $70 blow up pool that comes with a pump and everything and it's 2 feet, how do I have to erect a fence around that if it's temporary? And do I need to cover it? They're not really easily coverable. So I'm just wondering what the solution might be to someone who's reading this and going, oh my goodness, the little kiddie pool that just happens to meet the minimum depth requirement, what their, because at some point the cost of that pool is $70, then have to put a fence around it or a locked cover or whatnot, then just curious as to the thought there.
Through Chair Pierce to Councillor Kyle. So it was considered through the review that we do include temporary swimming pools. It isn't uncommon when looking at the neighboring and surrounding municipalities. It's actually quite typical nowadays in most of the updated bylaws, and it's really comes down to safety and health of the community and ensuring that even though it may be a temporary swimming pool, that it does have some sort of enclosure to keep it safe when it is unattended. Recognizing that pools do offer, relief during the summertime, exercise for the community, a means of play, obviously, throughout the community for children. They still need to be kept safe. So that was a consideration that was made. The bylaw is draft, and so there is still ability to amend the bylaw before it would proceed to council. But that was some of the rationale.
Questions? Seeing none, we have a mover and a seconder. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Moving on, 9.8, RPT-0709-22, Strategic Plan Update. Can I get a mover, please? Councillor Coleman, Councillor Bell. I see Adam in the back there. I'm not sure if he's going to do a presentation or just here for questions. Any questions on the report? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Okay, that's it for section 9. Moving on to section 10, notice of motion resolutions. We have a notice of motion regarding the nomination to Roma Board of Directors for Councillor Miller.
That's for next Tuesday, Mr. Chair, but I think it's self-explanatory.
Okay. No questions on that? Okay. Resolution from Councillor Bell. Obviously, it's moved by Councillor Bell. Is there somebody seconding that motion? Mayor Bailey? Councillor Bell, do you wish to speak?
Just a point of order, Mr. Mayor, or Mr. Chair. I'm going to ask that you rule the motion out of order for the following reasons. First of all, this committee does not have the authority to direct regulations to be imposed on properties by resolution. Typically, that's council's responsibility. The way the motion is formed, it has this committee directing that. But having said that, even if it was recommended to council, regulations cannot be imposed on properties by resolution. They can be imposed on properties by bylaw, specifically the comprehensive zoning bylaw, and it has to be done pursuant to the Planning Act, which requires notice and a public hearing. So the resolution is saying that it be directed that, which is, in my mind, out of order.
Okay.
And if you rule it out of order, that's why I added under other business the topic to allow Councillor Bell to proceed with his discussion on unintended consequences of urban intensification.
Okay, in that case, we will, at this point in time, with what Councillor Coleman or Councillor Chambers is saying there, it does. I guess it does have to go through that sequence. So for this particular notice of motion, I am going to rule it out of order, but we can circle back to it, as he stated, later on, and then we can have a discussion as to how we proceed with that at that time. Any questions to that? Okay, so we are going to move that on out of order. Okay, so that brings a close to section 10. Moving on to section 11, I don't see any communications. I do not see anything under other business. Oh, yes, sorry. I got too much paper here. That's why we should go electronic there, right, Councillor House? Yeah. My apologies. Under other business, we have something from Councillor Chambers in regards to the motion that Councillor Bell was trying to make there earlier. So, Councillor Chambers, do you wish to speak to it now?
Yes, I do, Mr. Chairman, and I recognize Councillor Bell has done a lot of work on this, and he should have the opportunity to speak to it. And I just wanted to make mention that the whereas clauses of resolution that was out of order are worth talking about, because they make a lot of sense. And in respect for Councillor Bell's work on this, I did want to allow him the opportunity to speak to about what he is calling the unintended consequences of urban intensification, because it is an issue, as Councillor Bell points out. And with that having been said, I will yield to Councillor Bell, who probably wants to talk about this. But I do have a suggested recommendation that Councillor Bell may allow me to place after his discussion.
Thank you, and thanks to Councillor Chambers for getting us on the right process. What I really wanted to do, actually, was to make sure that we had the conversation. And I've used this particular example as a means of bringing that conversation to the table. I have 2 slides. Nancy, are you able to put the first one out? While Nancy's doing that, let me say the driver for this whole discussion, this particular discussion about the proposed bylaw, which will have to go a different route now, was the unwelcome, at least to neighbours, and unapproved, certainly by our Committee of Adjustment, installation of 5 14.5-foot fence posts in a home in a new subdivision in southwest Paris. And this was a precursor to the installation of a 12-foot privacy fence. Now you can see it on the screen. The Committee of Adjustment rejected the fence bylaw variance request when it was brought to them at the insistence of the neighbours. But rather than remove the 5 fence posts, and you can see 4 of them there, the residents subsequently chose to keep the 2 end posts up as anchors for a zip line. And I think the lot size is 36 feet. It might be 40 feet. It's in that kind of area. So neighbours on all sides are understandably upset that the posts remain. And when pressed, our enforcement team concluded that there's no bylaw that prevents a zip line system with 14.5-foot anchor posts. And indeed, the resident commissioned a lawyer to represent him, and the lawyer, in conversations with our own in-house county lawyer, made the case that there is no bylaw non-compliance, and as such his client should not be prohibited from retaining the posts at their current height. And indeed he went on to actually install the zip line. It is in place. Just as a note, the view that you get on the right hand side there is from the immediate neighbour at the back. This has upset that neighbour so much he's put his house on the market. But it's not just him. Every neighbour on every side has complained about this. And Mayor Bailey and I think, took the brunt of the local complaints about this. And we together were frustrated that there was no way to actually push back on this. I think it's an example of an activity that would be appropriate in a lot with a larger lot size. And in this situation of a 36 or 40 foot wide lot with a very small rear yard, it actually is inappropriate. It's impractical at this scale. It's potentially unsafe given that the children in this family are very young, and it's certainly considered an eyesore by neighbours. If it was a commercial setting, the applicable laws would actually dictate larger anchor posts, just as an aside. but the law is silent on private settings despite potential safety implications. So I think a change of bylaw is necessary, and the process, as Councillor Chambers points out, is a different one from the one I had assumed. Indeed, it would be in the general provisions, I think, of the zoning bylaw that we would see it change. My concern was to push this through now because ideally we will do a comprehensive zoning bylaw update when the official plan is approved. I think it's already scheduled for that. But I didn't want this to linger. I didn't want this to be something that is repeated if it was at all possible. But this is just an example, I think, of something that is a consequence, an unintended consequence of the intensification of, in this particular case, Southwest Paris, but more generally. And we talked a few months ago in the last council about the fireworks bylaw, and we actually came to the conclusion that virtually every home in Southwest Paris is too small to accommodate fireworks in the back garden. You need 400 square meters, and I think the average rear yard in Southwest Paris is about 100 square meters. I think the largest one's probably about 200 in new estates. So the bigger and underlying issue is this: how do we deal with the unintended consequences? And Pam and the planning staff know, and they must be really cheesed off with me, but I talk to them every day about parking. And parking is yet another unintended consequence. I'll give you a third one. We had one stage earlier this year, a series of complaints to bylaw about basketball nets being placed too close to the main road. And in times past, certainly when I would have been a child, if I lived here, playing with a basketball net in the road would have been just second nature because there are so few cars, the traffic levels were so low. That has changed dramatically, and that is something that we have to recognize. So I want to just illustrate how intense development is in Southwest Paris. And if you could show the second slide, please, Nancy. And I've just used two examples. Just recently, we've been talking about Burford and servicing at Burford, and I happened to pick out this drawing. There are 630 dwellings in the built-up area of Burford in an area of about 2.5 square kilometers. And it has an average rear yard size of about 1,000 square meters, not kilometers. If you go then to Southwest Paris, in that yellow outlined area, that's the Mile Hill and Scenic Ridge developments. It's about 0.4 of a square kilometre. It's about 1/6 of the size of the Burford built-up area, and yet it has the same number of dwellings. And if we were to go to a little bit further to the to the north, and whether you stay on either side of Rest Eggers Road, you'd probably find that the density is increasing further as we build more and more townhomes. And the average rear yard is about 100 square meters, so 1/10 of what you would find in Burford. And I'm picking out Burford, but I could have talked about Canesville, I could have talked about St. George, the older parts of St. George. It's just illustrative of the fact that we are getting more and more intensely developed. And living in an increasingly closer proximity to neighbours, as is the natural consequence of that, you require greater social tolerance. You require greater neighbourliness, and you need a common sense acceptance that some practices and structures are inappropriate. And in the absence of reason, neighbourliness, and a community mindset, then I think we as the leaders of the community have to resort to legislation, and that in this case would be through a bylaw. And I want to add that this is not restricted to Paris. It is today, but it won't be tomorrow. If you have a look at the Empire Communities site plan, it covers an area, I think, of 0.6 of a square kilometre, and it has 900 dwellings in it. It's exactly the same density as you see in the southwest of Paris. So whatever problems Paris has today, St. George is going to face them in the coming years. And the fact that we're I'm suggesting that we include legislation is not, we're not breaking new ground. The cities of Mississauga, Brampton, Oakville, Vaughan all have bylaws restricting structures in rear gardens. The height restriction varies between 2.5 meters and 3 meters. So as Paris grows, we are seeing issues that larger communities to our east have seen in the past. And it actually should be a great source of knowledge that we can look to them and say, how did you solve this problem that we are seeing now? And like it or not, we are a small town growing quickly, and we're facing big city issues. And I know that some around this table would feel that we would be infringing on the personal space and rights of individuals. But I think we have to just step back and say what is in the best interests of our community. And it's interesting that in the bylaw that we've just signed off on fencing, there is a comment that says height restrictions are in place to maintain the overall character and aesthetics of the neighborhood. Having prescribed standards ensures that the rules are clear and consistent throughout the municipality. So we've taken a step of looking at the fence bylaw to say what is in the best interest of the community. And I think we also need to recognize that there are quite a few things that we do today that limit what can be done in a rear yard. The fencing bylaw is one example. We don't permit firework parties in these small backyards. We don't permit chickens. And I hate to bring up chickens in this story because it'll come up at least 3 times in the course of this term of council again. We don't permit those in urban yards. We have limitations on excessive noise, on excessive lighting. And periodically we have limitations on open fires in rear yards. These are all limitations that are in place in the best interests of our community. So the motion I had proposed and would like to see brought through staff when we do this comprehensive zoning bylaw is similarly targeted in the best interests of our community. But I'll offer a corollary to this, and I think it's something that we need to step back and think about, certainly in areas where we have not approved site plans yet. If we impose a restriction, like you can't have a private firework party, then I think it's something that we as the council, the county, should say, well, we will provide a community firework party. If we limit rear yard structures, we should provide more public play structures. Then doing so, we need to change the requirements for parkland and parkland dedication. So it's not simply saying you cannot do this, it's saying you can't do this because of these good reasons in the interests of the whole community, but as a quid pro quo, we offer you something that offers, we offer you back something that replaces what we've taken from you. And it is indeed, again, in the best interests of the community. So I'll stop at that. It is, to me, a really important debate that we need to have. It probably is better done in the policy and strategic direction forum, but today this is a joint meeting of the two effectively because we had to cancel one. But we are going to be faced with increasingly these kinds of issues. If you just look around both north and south of Paris, we're not anywhere near the end of the building. And every time we build something new, the density increases. When you get to St. George, you're going to start from a very dense area and you probably go even further than we have done. So I think it's important that we step back and take a leadership role as county, and we will, of course, rely on our county staff to do the necessary research, but also to draw on examples from elsewhere in the province where people have faced these problems before. They've got solutions. We should not have to invent our own solutions. We should be willing to steal and use solutions that other people have already brought forward. At that point, Mr. Chair, I'll stop talking.
Okay. Thank you for that. So I'm going to, if there's any questions, and then we'll go back to Councillor Chambers for the potential motion. So we're going to go Councillor Howes, Councillor Miller, and then Councillor McAlpine.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a few comments rather than questions, if that's okay.
Go ahead.
So, thank you. I'm going to respectfully disagree with parts of Councillor Bell's proposal. And I recognize that work needs to be done on this. I recognize that we need to look at some solutions. I recognize that 14-foot fence posts in the backyard would be irritating for neighbors. However, I'm not convinced that a solution of prohibiting freestanding structures that stand more than absolute height of 8 feet. I'm not sure that that's the right approach to this. When I look at we don't want kids playing basketball out in the street with basketball goals. A basketball backstop is taller than 8 feet, and even if someone with a small yard, if they want to have a basketball backstop in their backyard, I think that's something that they should be able to do. Likewise, if I want to spend enough money and have a 10-foot tree planted in my small backyard, I could hang a tire swing from it, and kids could swing on a tire swing. But if I don't want to spend the money on a 10-foot tree, maybe I want to put in a 10-foot post that allows kids to have a tire swing. And so I think people that buy property in our municipality and who move here because they want the small town charm, which we hear all the time, I think they deserve to have some rights on what they can do in their backyard within reason. I mentioned a couple examples. Councillor Bell referenced fireworks at least 3 times in his explanation. I would argue that fireworks in a small backyard have a more significant impact on the neighboring properties than a basketball goal or a swing or even a zip line. Fireworks can be noisy. They can, pieces of the fireworks can land in neighboring properties on cars. I'm not sure that the fireworks comparison is an appropriate one in this argument. And the only other thing I wanted to mention was that, this apparently one of the residents that helped trigger this discussion has a zip line in their backyard with 14-foot posts, at least on one end. For a 4-foot tall kid, you can have a zip line that's 7 feet 11 inches off the ground, and I just think there needs to be different ways to approach this than being this restrictive. So I do agree with the idea of asking staff to look at how other municipalities are addressing this. However, I would add, rather than looking at how Oakville or Mississauga or Brampton are solving this problem, let's look at how Milton and Halton Hills and Stratford, other smaller municipalities might be addressing and solving these problems. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll be brief. I just want to laud Councillor Bell for his efforts to solve a ward issue. I want to laud him as well for identifying the fact that intensification is changing the nature of the county, and we can't always look at things like we did in the past. So I appreciate that. If there was a Lionel Messi award for effort, I would give it to Councillor Bell tonight. But like Councillor House, and I brought these up with Councillor Bell, there's questions, about certain structures. I mentioned solar, a playhouse, a clubhouse. My neighbor has a blow-up Santa that's way bigger than 8 feet. So is there a seasonal component to it? And I think these are questions that if you referred it to staff and the process was followed, I think we could get a pretty decent bylaw out of these suggestions. And I'll conclude, Mr. Mayor, by pointing at the report 9.7 tonight, and that's the fence bylaw brought forward by Ms. Kitchen. If you read that report, the amount of public engagement that staff did is just, it's amazing, right? And they got as much input as they can. And I believe that's the way you do a good bylaw, right? You involve the public as much as possible. So credit to Councillor Chambers for pointing us in the right direction. And I think if we go the right process, I think we're going to get ourselves a good bylaw out of this. So, and I look forward to seeing that.
Thank you. Very good points. Councillor McAlpine.
I'm starting to echo what the other councillors said, but I'm just following up on, Councillor Bell sent me some information, how Brampton and some of the other areas use it. I think it's what you're open to too as well. And it kind of addresses some of the issues and how they had dealt with it. So for instance, with the zip line, they don't allow any playground equipment within, it has to be at least 2 feet away from the borders. So they wouldn't be able to use those posts in that case. And what they reference to is 3-meter high structures. So for gazebos, if you look online, that's kind of, you need at least that 3 meters to facilitate those type of uses. So I think if we make some small changes, similar to what other counties have done and communities through staff, I think this is something that's worthwhile pursuing and looking into deeper, because I think it has potential for problems and needs to be looked at. So.
Thank you for that. Any other questions, comments? I'm going to put the table back to Councillor Chambers.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman, and thanks, Councillor Bell, for the information. Just a couple comments, not getting into specifics. There is the issue of legal nonconformance. So sometimes if things are bothering people and you put a bylaw, you can't change what's already there because of the legal nonconforming status. There's also a difference in bylaws between regulating structures and regulating activities. And noise bylaw, for example, is an activity that isn't in the comprehensive zoning bylaw, and you have to make those distinctions. But the point that I think I get out of what Councillor Bell is saying is that Brant County is changing in that its urban areas are intensifying, and we as a council need to look at that. So I've just, this is just off the top of my head, Mr. Chairman, and knowing that, excuse me, knowing that you can strike committees without notice of motion, I would make this suggestion, and perhaps I could get a seconder. My motion would be that it be recommended to council to create an ad hoc committee of council with, but not limited to, the following terms of reference. Number 1, to review all applicable bylaws, plans, and policies and identify concerns related to the unintended consequences of urban intensification. 2, to report these concerns with recommendations on how to address them to council no later than, and I said June 2023, with interim reports at the committee's discretion. 3, that the composition of the committee be mayor ex officio, a representative from each of the 3 most affected wards, which are 1, 2, and 3. Specifically, Ward 3, Councillor Bell acting as chair. Ward 2, Councillor Howes, and Ward 1, Councillor McAlpine, and I did that just because of the experience, not to slight the new members, and that's at the discretion of council. And finally, and that the committee be supported by staff as necessary from the planning department, the legal department, and the clerk's department. And if that motion would be seconded, I would say that allows some political input into the process. And as politician, we hear from the public directly, and working with staff with a political bent and a committee rather than a strict staff approach, I think it involves the council in a leadership role more so than if it was just recommended to staff to bring back recommendations. So that's why I would like to strike a committee, Mr. Chairman, and that was my musing on strike.
Thank you for that. And if I may, you said that was just off the top of your head. You never do anything off the top of your head, Councillor Chambers. There's always a thought process behind it, and we appreciate that. Very well. So I'm going to ask a couple things here before we go any further. Did you catch the motion?
I did not catch out the whole motion, but I would ask Councillor Chambers
Okay.
to read it back or provide it.
You've got it written there, correct? Okay. So, first of all, is there a seconder to that motion? Councillor Bell. Okay. We understand what the motion is here. I think it's going to definitely get us in the direction I believe that we all want and need to go. So I'm going to open it up here for discussion on that amendment. I guess it's not really an amendment, it's a motion. Discussion on that motion. Councillor Bell.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you to Councillor Chambers for so eloquently putting into words what I failed to do. It is the right thing to do. It is important that we understand the issues that our community is facing. And you're quite right to focus on wards 1, 2, and 3. That's where the current growth is. But hopefully there will be learning that will pass on to other wards should those other wards experience the same kind of growth. I just wanted to pick up on the fence bylaw. It's just a small thing, but when I originally drafted my proposed bylaw, the fence height was 6 feet. Now it's 7 feet 3, so already we've gained a foot and a third in terms of where I would go.
So,
I think
sorry, Councillor Bell, I'm going to stop you right there. So, and I appreciate where you're going here, but the fence bylaw isn't really to the motion here. So I just want to if you can tie this back into that motion.
I will just offer my full support to it.
Sorry, okay, thank you. Councillor Garno.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I appreciate Councillor Chambers' recommendation to move this forward because I do think it requires more discussion. I just want to speak from the rural perspective for a moment because in my ward, when I was and it speaks to the committee composition, that's where I'm going here, there are properties that would have been in Ward 5 that might have been captured in the bylaw or the resolution as it was passed forward. And I think it may be beneficial to the group to have someone who lives in the rural communities and certainly things are not as standardized, I guess I could say, in our villages, and there could be some unintended consequences with arbitrary limits about lot size, for example, where from the road you might not be able to tell, but we may be in a position where one neighbor is permitted to do something and one is not, whereas in a more intensified area, likely it would apply to everyone. So if I could just, I guess, speak up to encourage the committee here to consider whether we should get someone from the rural as well around that table.
Are you looking for a friendly amendment to that motion to add?
Yeah, I'll make that amendment.
Councillor Chambers as the mover, are you willing to accept the friendly amendment?
Another member at large from the other rural prone wards. And Councillor Garneau is willing to stand. I can put that on my, again, this has to be approved by council.
Absolutely, yep.
People are named, don't want to be named, they can choose that.
Right. No, I appreciate that. And I think part of that point is too, is as Councillor Bell had said, right now, this isn't a problem in St. George, Ward 1, where, down the road, it's definitely going to be. So I don't want to look that far down the road, but when we umpteen years down the road, who knows what's going to happen to, with Ward 4 and Ward 5. But at any rate, I think we're good with that friendly amendment. The seconder is okay with that friendly amendment as well. So I think we can add that. Thank you for pointing that out. And I cut you off there. Did you have anything else for that?
No, that's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions to the motion as amended? Seeing none, all those in favor of the motion as amended? Opposed? That is carried. And then Councillor Chambers, you'll get that to Nancy, and then we can just confirm on that. Okay, very good discussion on that, folks. Okay, so that's, next is to move into camera. Motion to move into camera. Councillor Howes, Councillor Oakley, all in favor? Okay, we're going to recess for about 2 minutes. Okay, we are back in open session now. Thank you very much. I do not see anything else on the agenda, so thank you everybody that tuned in this evening to watch, and thank you to committee. Motion to adjourn. Councillor House, thank you very